Welcome to Beyond 101. My name is Nate, and I'll be guiding you through the fascinating world of immunology. Immunology is the study of our immune system, which is the part of our body that is responsible for fighting threats, for fighting things that the body deems as harmful. And I'm going to put threats in quotations for now, and we'll get back to why a little bit later. But when we think of threats to the body, we might think of certain bacteria, or viruses, parasites, and fungi. And we can classify the types of bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi that cause disease as pathogens. Pathogens being any microorganism that causes harm to the body. Now, I want to emphasize that it's only the ones that cause disease because a majority of bacteria are not pathogenic. They don't actually cause diseases in humans. And it's important to note that the bacteria that cover our bodies are actually important in fighting against infection. They help train the immune system and they outcompete pathogens that find their way onto these surfaces for resources. Now, I want to return back to our definition of the immune system and why I put threats in quotations, because sometimes the immune system gets it wrong. Sometimes it will identify things that are not threats as threats and host an immune response. And when this happens, it can lead to some pretty drastic effects. So in the case that the immune system targets something that is benign, that just found its way into the body as a threat, that's what leads to allergies. If you're allergic to tree pollen or peanuts, that's because the body incorrectly identified it as a threat and the immune system hosts a response against it. Now, the other case is when the immune system targets cells in the body. When you target self, that's when you get autoimmune disorders. An example of which might be type 1 diabetes, in which the immune system will consider the cells that secrete insulin as a threat, and they will try to destroy them, which will lead to people with type 1 diabetes needing to find artificial sources of insulin. And these types of disorders are quite dangerous, and we're going to discuss how both allergies and autoimmune disorders develop later within the series. We can split the immune system into two distinct branches. The first branch is going to be the innate immune system. Now, the defenses of the innate immune system are non-specific, meaning they will respond, or the defenses will respond to any threat the moment it is detected. This is our first line of defense. Now we can contrast that with the second branch of the immune system, the adaptive immune system. Now, the adaptive immune system is unlike the innate immune system in that it is extremely specific. And what I mean by that is that each cell only responds sorry about that, to one pathogen. It is our second line of defense, and it is activated by the innate immune system. let's use an example to demonstrate the differences between the innate and the adaptive immune system. So here, this guy, we're going to name him Jordan. No reason. I just like the name. And the person next to him, we see we're on a subway. The person next to him is sneezing, and he didn't cover his mouth. Now, in this moment, our rude neighbor has spewed a myriad of different microorganisms that were living in his mouth and in his respiratory tract, including one known as Streptococcus pneumoniae. This is the bacteria which causes pneumonia. Now, as soon as this bacteria enters Jordan or his airway, there are going to be innate immune cells that detect it. And we'll draw it like this little blobby guy right here. And the job of this innate immune cell is going to be to detect the pathogen, which I have colored in green, and to engulf it. And it's going to be doing this through a process known as phagocytosis. Now, after this has happened, the innate immune cell is going to do something very important. It's going to process the Streptococcus pneumoniae and show pieces of it on special receptors. And we're going to go very in depth into this process because this is going to be the basis for the activation of the adaptive immune system. And we can see this green diamond here is supposed to be the fragment of the pathogen that the innate immune cell has just swallowed. And this fragment in particular is going to be known as an antigen. So this innate immune cell is going to then leave and search for an adaptive immune cell that can recognize this specific antigen. Now, there's a world in which this never happens, and this is not a world that we want to be living in if we're Jordan, because this might mean that the bacteria goes rampant. But in the case that there is a cell that the innate immune cell is able to find that can bind to this receptor, bind to the antigen, then something very special happens. So if this is our adaptive immune cell and its receptor is able to fit to this antigen, it is going to then activate. And the activation of this adaptive immune cell is really going to be the key to how we're able to, or how the body is able to fully be rid of the bacteria. So it is going to specialize. And we will demonstrate this as sort of this spiky thing with more of these receptors that were able to detect the antigen. At the same time, this activated adaptive immune cell, and we're going to get into the specifics of which adaptive immune cell this is and what it does later on, but it's going to secrete what are known as antibodies. Antibodies are small proteins. They have this sort of Y-shaped shape, and what their job is to then bind to the pathogen sort of the same way that innate immune cell did, or that adaptive immune cell did at the very beginning. We see that here. And this is going to do several things, but one of the most important things is that it's going to signal for more innate immune cells to know that know that the pathogen's there, so that it too can phagocytose the pathogen. The other important thing that happens in this step, in the activation of the adaptive immune system, is that some of the adaptive immune cells are going to go off after the immune response has concluded and become what are known as memory cells. These memory cells are going to be in circulation for the rest of Jordan's life and in higher concentrations immediately after the immune response happened. But the point of these memory cells is that they are going to shorten the time it takes for the adaptive immune system to activate after the innate immune system has done its job, after the innate immune system has engulfed the pathogen, digested it and processes the antigens. This is the basis for how vaccines work, as a matter of fact. Vaccines are, the point of them is to take a pathogen, either parts of it or the whole thing in a weakened, more docile state, and expose the body to it so that the innate immune response can happen and the adaptive immune response can happen, and the memory cells can then form. Because if that same pathogen finds its way to Jordan again, the memory cells will be much quicker in being able to be detected by the innate immune cells, which speeds up the process, which means that whatever infection occurs isn't going to be as harmful. So, the innate and the adaptive immune system employ several different defense mechanisms against pathogens, and we can classify these mechanisms into three distinct parts. So, first we have our anatomical defenses, and these are going to be our barriers, our physical and chemical barriers against infection. And we see these anatomical barriers in all the places that are technically touching the outside. So obviously that's going to include our skin, it's going to include our mouth, eyes, nose, and ears. It's also going to include our GI system, or gastrointestinal or digestive system. These, remember, are parts that if you were to look from a topological standpoint, they have access to the outside world. We open our mouth and it's essentially one big tube. So our stomachs, our intestines have contact with the outside, and they therefore need a defense system to make sure that that area isn't going to get breached or lead to infection further within the body. And to the same vein, our lungs also act as an anatomical barrier. Our whole respiratory system is lined with ways to stop things from the outside world breaching these barriers and getting into the body. And we're going to go in depth into this in the next video, as a matter of fact. And these anatomical barriers are going to apply physical barriers, but also they're going to apply the second type of defense that we have, our chemical barriers. Our anatomical barriers, especially if we think about our skin and our mouth, are going to secrete things like antimicrobial enzymes that will somehow, break through the cell membranes of bacteria or perhaps slow down viral infection. The other main part of our chemical defenses is what's known as the complement system. Now, we're going to go much more in depth into the complement system later on, but as a brief summary, it is a series of proteins that interact with each other and that will both lead to things like inflammation, but also similar to antibodies, they mark pathogens for to be devoured by the third part of our defense system, our cellular defenses. And these are our white blood cells, the cells that are specially made to fight against infection. And we can abbreviate white blood cells to WBC. Now, the white blood cells of the innate and adaptive immune system are different. So when we think of the white blood cells of the innate immune system, that's when we get things like macrophages, we get neutrophils, and all our other innate immune cells. One that many people with allergies might know are things like mast cells. And there are others that I haven't mentioned, but we will get further into depth about the cells of the innate immune system later on. And when we come to the adaptive immune system, that's when we get our lymphocytes. And our lymphocytes are the family of cells that make up our T cells and our B cells. Now, all of these cells we are going to go much more in depth into as to how their lineage, how they develop, and their specific functions within the immune system. So that brings us to the end of this video. We introduced immunology as a whole by defining what pathogens are. We defined the two divisions of the immune system, and we began to describe some of the defenses that both the innate and the adaptive immune system use in order to fight against things that they define as threats. Now, in the next video, we are going to dive further in depth into the anatomical and early chemical barriers.